In the golden halls of Windsor Castle, where centuries of royal tradition echo through marble corridors, a single moment can change everything. Behind the velvet ropes and crystal chandeliers, away from the cameras and curious crowds, the British royal family guards its secrets with the same fierce protection they reserve for the crown jewels themselves. But what happens when that protection turns inward? When the very people sworn to serve the monarchy must choose between loyalty and duty? When a prince finds himself on the wrong side of a door that has always opened for him? This is the story of a guard who said no, a prince who couldn't understand why, and a palace that watched its carefully constructed world begin to crack. It's a tale of power, privilege, and the price of scandal in a family where image means everything, and forgiveness comes with conditions. The royal box at Ascot Racecourse has welcomed kings and queens, diplomats, and dignitaries, but on this particular afternoon, it would become the stage for a confrontation that would send shockwaves through the corridors of power and leave the monarchy questioning everything they thought they knew about loyalty, justice, and the weight of a crown. The morning of the Ascot races dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of British sunshine that photographers dream of and royal correspondents pray for. Detective Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his earpiece for the third time as he stood outside the royal box, his eyes scanning the crowd of elegantly dressed guests making their way toward the exclusive viewing area. Mitchell had been protecting members of the royal family for 12 years. He had accompanied them on state visits, stood guard during private family gatherings, and witnessed moments of both triumph and tragedy behind palace walls. His record was spotless, his loyalty unquestioned, and his discretion absolute. Today should have been just another routine assignment at one of the season's most prestigious events. The royal box at Ascot was a symbol of tradition and exclusivity. Built in 1961, it offered the perfect vantage point for the royal family to watch the races while maintaining their distance from the general public. The guest list was always carefully curated, each name vetted and approved by palace officials weeks in advance. Security protocols were strict but well-rehearsed, and Mitchell knew every entrance, exit, and emergency procedure by heart. As the afternoon progressed, Mitchell watched the familiar faces of the royal family arrive. The Queen, resplendent in a bright blue coat and matching hat, waved graciously to the crowds below. Prince Charles and Camilla followed, engaging in polite conversation with other guests. The atmosphere was relaxed, festive even, as champagne flowed, and the excitement of the races built throughout the afternoon. It was just after the third race when Mitchell received the call that would change everything. His supervisor's voice crackled through his earpiece with instructions that made his blood run cold. New intelligence had come to light regarding Prince Andrew's ongoing legal troubles. The FBI had issued additional warrants, and the palace legal team had advised immediate implementation of enhanced security protocols. Until further notice, Prince Andrew was to be restricted from attending any public royal events. Mitchell's hand instinctively moved to the folder in his jacket pocket. Inside were the official documents, signed and sealed with the authority of the palace itself. The orders were clear and unambiguous, but Mitchell knew that executing them would be anything but simple. Prince Andrew was not just another member of the public to be denied entry. He was the Queen's son, a man who had grown up believing that doors would always open for him, that his royal status was an unshakable guarantee of access and privilege. The irony was not lost on Mitchell that he would be the one to shatter that illusion. A working-class man from Yorkshire, the son of a factory worker and a school teacher, he had risen through the ranks of the Metropolitan Police through sheer determination and an unwavering sense of duty. Now, that same sense of duty would require him to stand between a prince and what the prince considered his birthright. As Mitchell positioned himself more prominently at the entrance to the royal box, he caught sight of Prince Andrew approaching through the crowd. The prince moved with the confident stride of a man accustomed to having paths clear before him, his face showing no hint of concern or uncertainty. He was dressed impeccably in morning dress, his medals catching the afternoon light, every inch the royal prince that the public had known for decades. Behind Prince Andrew walked a small entourage of palace staff and personal protection officers, their faces betraying none of the tension that Mitchell knew must be building in their earpieces. They had received the same instructions he had, and they were as bound by duty as he was to ensure those instructions were followed, regardless of the personal cost. The crowd around the royal box seemed to sense that something significant was about to unfold. Conversations became more hushed, and heads began to turn toward the entrance where Mitchell stood. The other guests, many of whom moved in the same social circles as the royal family, recognized the subtle signs of increased tension that spoke of drama brewing beneath the surface of royal protocol. Mitchell felt the weight of history pressing down on him as Prince Andrew drew closer. This was not just about following orders or implementing security protocols. This was about the fundamental question of whether anyone, regardless of their birth or status, was truly above the consequences of their actions. For years, the royal family had navigated scandals and controversies with carefully orchestrated damage control, strategic silences, and the protective shield of tradition. But times were changing. Public opinion was shifting, and the old methods of managing royal crises were proving insufficient in an age of social media and instant global communication. The palace had finally reached a point where protecting the institution of the monarchy required making painful sacrifices, even if that meant sacrificing one of its own. As Prince Andrew reached the entrance to the royal box, his eyes met Mitchell's. There was a moment of mutual recognition, an acknowledgement of the roles they each played in this carefully choreographed world of royal protocol. Prince Andrew smiled the practiced smile of a man who had spent his entire life in the public eye, a smile that expected reciprocal deference and immediate compliance. Mitchell did not smile back. Instead, he stepped forward slightly, positioning himself directly in Prince Andrew's path. The movement was subtle but unmistakable, a clear signal that this encounter would not follow the usual script. The conversations around them began to falter as more people noticed the tension building at the entrance to the exclusive viewing area. Prince Andrew's smile faltered as he registered Mitchell's posture and expression. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he was faced with the possibility that his royal status might not be enough to guarantee him access to where he wanted to go. The realization was written across his face, a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and the first stirrings of indignation. Mitchell's hand moved to his jacket pocket, fingers closing around the official documents that would justify what he was about to do. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind a dozen times during the short walk from receiving his orders to taking his position at the entrance. He knew the exact words he would use, the precise tone that would convey both respect and absolute finality. The moment of truth had arrived, and Mitchell understood that whatever happened next would reverberate far beyond this single afternoon at the races. The foundations of royal privilege were about to be tested in the most public way possible, and he was the man who would either uphold them or watch them crumble. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, Detective Sergeant James Mitchell prepared to make history. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity, though it lasted only seconds. Prince Andrew's confident stride faltered as he processed the unprecedented sight of a security officer blocking his path to the royal box. His face cycled through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a flash of the anger that those closest to him knew could ignite without warning. "I beg your pardon," Prince Andrew said, his voice carrying the tone of aristocratic authority that had opened doors throughout his life. "I believe there's been some misunderstanding." Mitchell straightened his shoulders and withdrew the official documents from his pocket with deliberate care. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and professional, betraying none of the turmoil he felt inside. "Your Royal Highness, I have been instructed by palace security to inform you that access to the royal box has been temporarily restricted. These are my orders, signed by the appropriate authorities." The words hung in the air like a physical barrier between them. Around the entrance, the carefully maintained bubble of royal protocol began to crack as other guests realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Mobile phones appeared discreetly as people began to document what could potentially become one of the most significant royal confrontations in modern history. Prince Andrew's face darkened as the full implications of Mitchell's words sank in. For a man who had served his country as a naval officer, who had fought in the Falklands War, and who had represented the crown on countless official occasions, being denied entry to a royal event was not just humiliating. It was incomprehensible. "Do you know who I am?" The prince's voice rose slightly, the practiced composure beginning to crack. "I'm a son of the queen. I have every right to be here. This is absolutely ridiculous." Mitchell remained unmoved, his training and sense of duty providing an anchor against the storm brewing before him. "I'm aware of your identity, your royal highness, and I understand this is difficult. However, my orders are clear and non-negotiable. I will be happy to escort you to a private area where this matter can be discussed further." The offer of a private discussion was both a lifeline and an insult to Prince Andrew. It suggested that his royal status still commanded some level of respect, but it also made clear that the days of automatic deference were over. The prince looked past Mitchell toward the royal box, where he could see other members of his family watching the races, apparently unaware of the drama unfolding just meters away. Lady Sarah Pemberton, a longtime family friend who had been walking behind Prince Andrew, stepped forward hesitantly. Her face was pale with the shock of witnessing such an unprecedented breach of royal protocol. "Perhaps there's been some administrative error," she suggested hopefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "Surely this can be sorted out quickly." Mitchell's expression softened slightly as he addressed Lady Sarah, but his resolve remained firm. "I'm afraid not, my lady. These instructions come from the highest levels of palace security. They are not subject to revision or appeal at this venue." The crowd around them had grown larger and more attentive. What had begun as curious glances had evolved into open staring as word spread through the exclusive gathering that a member of the royal family was being denied entry to their own box. The whispered conversations carried an electric current of excitement and disbelief. Prince Andrew's protection officer, Inspector David Thompson, approached Mitchell with visible reluctance. Thompson had been assigned to the prince for over 3 years and had developed a professional respect for his charge, despite the growing controversies surrounding him. Now he found himself caught between competing loyalties and conflicting orders. "Sergeant Mitchell," Thompson said quietly, "perhaps we could find a way to handle this more discreetly. The press attention this is generating could be problematic for everyone involved." Mitchell glanced around at the growing crowd and the increasingly obvious presence of camera phones. He understood Thompson's concern, but he also knew that backing down now would undermine not just his own authority, but the entire structure of accountability that the palace was trying to establish. "Inspector Thompson," Mitchell replied, "I appreciate your concern, but discretion was an option that expired the moment His Royal Highness chose to make this a public confrontation rather than accepting the private discussion I offered." The truth in Mitchell's words was uncomfortable but undeniable. Prince Andrew had escalated the situation by refusing to step aside and address the matter privately. His decision to push for immediate entry to the royal box had guaranteed that whatever happened next would unfold in full view of the Ascot crowd and their cameras. Prince Andrew stepped closer to Mitchell, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that only those immediately nearby could hear. "You have no idea what you're doing, Sergeant. Do you understand the consequences of humiliating a member of the royal family in public? Your career is over. Your life, as you know it, is finished." The threat was delivered with the cold certainty of a man accustomed to having his wishes treated as commands. For decades, Prince Andrew had moved through a world where his displeasure could end careers and his favor could create fortunes. He had never encountered a situation where those dynamics didn't apply. Mitchell met the prince's gaze without flinching. His response, when it came, was delivered with the same quiet professionalism that had defined his entire career. "Your Royal Highness, I understand your frustration, but I have a duty that supersedes personal consequences. That duty is to follow lawful orders and protect the integrity of the institution I serve." The words struck Prince Andrew like physical blows. For the first time in the confrontation, he seemed to fully grasp that his royal status was not going to resolve the situation in his favor. The protection that his title had always provided was failing him when he needed it most. Mrs. Patricia Hartwell, a prominent socialite who had been standing nearby, stepped forward with a well-intentioned but misguided belief that her intervention might help resolve the situation. "Surely there's been some mistake," she said to Mitchell. "Prince Andrew has attended every Ascot for 20 years. This must be some sort of communication error." Mitchell turned to address Mrs. Hartwell with polite but firm clarity. "Ma'am, I can assure you there has been no error. These orders were issued this morning following a comprehensive review by Palace Security in consultation with government officials. They are final and binding." The mention of government officials sent another ripple through the crowd. It suggested that this was not merely an internal palace matter, but something involving the highest levels of state authority. The implications were staggering for those who understood the complex relationship between the royal family and the elected government. Prince Andrew's face had gone pale beneath his carefully maintained tan. The reality of a situation was finally beginning to penetrate his initial shock and anger. This was not a temporary embarrassment that could be smoothed over with royal influence. This was a fundamental shift in how he would be treated by the very institution that had defined his entire existence. "I demand to speak to my mother," he said, his voice now carrying a note of desperation that hadn't been there before. "The Queen needs to know what's happening here." Mitchell nodded respectfully. "Your Royal Highness, I'm sure arrangements can be made for you to speak with Her Majesty at the appropriate time and through the proper channels. However, that conversation will not change my orders for today." The finality in Mitchell's voice seemed to deflate something in Prince Andrew. For the first time since the confrontation began, he appeared to truly understand that this was not a battle he could win through force of personality or royal prerogative. The rules that had governed his entire life had changed, and he was only now beginning to comprehend the full scope of that change. As the standoff continued, the attention of the entire royal box area had become focused on the drama unfolding at its entrance. Even members of the royal family inside the box had begun to notice the commotion, though they remained diplomatically focused on the races rather than acknowledging the crisis playing out just meters away. The moment had become a symbol of something much larger than a simple security incident. It represented the collision between old privilege and new accountability, between royal tradition and modern justice. And at the center of it all stood Detective Sergeant James Mitchell, a man who had chosen duty over deference and principle over convenience, regardless of the personal cost. The news reached Buckingham Palace within minutes of the confrontation at Ascot. Private Secretary Sir Edward Young was in the middle of reviewing the Queen's evening schedule when his assistant burst through the office door with an urgency that violated every protocol of royal household etiquette. "Sir Edward," the young woman gasped, her face flushed with anxiety. "We have a situation at Ascot. Prince Andrew has been denied entry to the royal box, and the entire incident is being filmed by dozens of guests." Sir Edward felt the familiar weight of crisis management settling on his shoulders. In his 15 years as private secretary to the Queen, he had navigated countless scandals, diplomatic incidents, and family crises. But nothing had prepared him for the moment when the palace's own security protocols would be used to publicly humiliate a senior member of the royal family. Within the royal box at Ascot, the atmosphere had shifted from festive celebration to barely concealed tension. Princess, and ever the pragmatist, had been the first to notice the disturbance at the entrance. Her trained eye had immediately assessed the situation with military precision, and she had quietly alerted other family members without drawing attention from the watching crowd. The The Queen herself remained focused on the races, her decades of experience having taught her that royal dignity was best maintained through studied indifference to surrounding chaos. However, those who knew her well could detect the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated her awareness of the developing crisis. Prince Charles, heir to the throne and increasingly involved in day-to-day palace operations, excused himself from a conversation with the Duke of Richmond and made his way to a quiet corner of the royal box. His phone call to Sir Edward was brief but urgent, seeking clarification about events that threatened to overshadow one of the royal calendar's most important social occasions. Back at the entrance, Prince Andrew's entourage had grown as more palace staff arrived to assess the situation. The presence of additional officials only served to draw more attention from the crowd, creating exactly the kind of public spectacle that royal protocol was designed to prevent. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Williams, Mitchell's immediate superior, arrived on scene within 20 minutes of the initial confrontation. Her face was grim as she approached the standoff, knowing that whatever decision she made would have profound implications for both palace security and public perception of royal accountability. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said quietly, positioning herself slightly apart from the main group, "I need a full briefing on the situation." Mitchell stepped aside with his superior, grateful for the opportunity to explain his actions to someone who understood both the legal and political complexities of his position. In rapid, professional sentences, he outlined the morning's instructions, the security protocols that had been activated, and his repeated attempts to offer Prince Andrew a private resolution to the matter. He refused all offers of discretion, Mitchell concluded. His insistence on forcing his way into the royal box left me with no alternative but to enforce the restrictions publicly. Inspector Williams nodded thoughtfully. She had read Mitchell's file before approving his assignment to royal protection duties, and she knew him to be a man of unquestionable integrity and sound judgment. If he said that Prince Andrew had been offered private alternatives, she believed him completely. "The palace is in chaos," she told him quietly. "There are emergency meetings being called, legal opinions being sought, and serious questions being raised about whether the security services have overstepped their authority." Mitchell's expression didn't change, but Williams could see the weight of responsibility in his eyes. "Ma'am, I followed the orders I was given. If those orders were incorrect or unauthorized, that's a matter for others to determine. My job was to implement them professionally and completely." The conversation between the two officers was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Edward Young himself, who had made the unprecedented decision to leave the palace and travel to Ascot to manage the crisis personally. His presence at the racecourse sent a clear signal about the seriousness with which the palace viewed the situation. Sir Edward approached Prince Andrew with the careful diplomacy that had served him throughout his career in royal service. "Your Royal Highness," he said with a respectful bow, "I deeply regret the circumstances of this afternoon. Perhaps we might discuss this matter in private, away from the public attention." Prince Andrew turned to face the private secretary with barely controlled fury. "Edward, what the hell is going on here? I demand an immediate explanation for this unprecedented humiliation." Sir Edward's response was measured and careful, designed to de-escalate the situation while providing as little public information as possible. "Your Royal Highness, there have been recent developments that required immediate implementation of enhanced security protocols. I believe a full briefing would be more appropriate in a private setting." The euphemistic language did nothing to soothe Prince Andrew's anger, but it did provide him with an opportunity to withdraw from the public confrontation with some semblance of dignity intact. After a long moment of internal struggle, he nodded curtly to Sir Edward. "Very well," he said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "But I want answers, and I want them immediately." As Prince Andrew and his entourage were escorted to a private area of the racecourse, Mitchell remained at his post, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the emotional toll of the afternoon's events. The crowd around the royal box entrance began to disperse, but the whispered conversations and surreptitious photography continued. Inside Buckingham Palace, the crisis response machinery had shifted into full operation. Legal advisors were reviewing the constitutional implications of security services restricting a member of the royal family's movements. Communication specialists were developing strategies for managing the inevitable media coverage. Palace historians were researching precedents for similar situations in the long history of the monarchy. The Queen's afternoon schedule was quietly cleared as she was briefed on the developing situation. Her response, according to those present, was characteristically measured. She asked pointed questions about the legal basis for the security restrictions and the potential consequences of both upholding and overturning them. Private conversations between senior royals revealed the deep divisions within the family about how to handle Prince Andrew's ongoing legal troubles. Some argued for continued support and protection, viewing any public humiliation of a family member as damaging to the institution as a whole. Others contended that protecting Prince Andrew at the expense of royal credibility was a strategy that had already failed and needed to be abandoned. The afternoon's events had also sent shockwaves through the broader establishment. Government officials who had been briefed on the security protocols found themselves fielding urgent calls from parliamentary colleagues, seeking clarification about the state's role in royal family matters. The careful balance between constitutional monarchy and democratic accountability was being tested in the most public way possible. Media outlets around the world began to pick up the story, with social media amplifying eyewitness accounts and amateur video footage from Ascot. The hashtag #RoyalBoxGate began trending within hours, as public opinion started to form around the images of a prince being denied entry to his own family's private area. For Detective Sergeant James Mitchell, the personal cost of his afternoon's work was only beginning to become clear. Death threats from ardent royalists appeared on his social media accounts. Requests for interviews from journalists flooded his phone. His family members found themselves under scrutiny from reporters seeking background information about the man who had dared to stand up to a prince. Yet Mitchell felt no regret about his actions. In the hours that followed the confrontation, as he completed the extensive paperwork required for such an incident, he remained convinced that he had done his duty as he understood it. The law was supposed to apply equally to all citizens, regardless of their birth or status. If that principle meant anything, it had to be upheld even when the consequences were personally and professionally devastating. The long-term implications of the Ascot incident would reverberate through the royal family for months to come. It marked the beginning of a new era in which royal privilege could no longer be taken for granted, where accountability would sometimes trump tradition, and where the actions of individual family members could no longer be shielded from consequences by the protective umbrella of the crown. As the sun set over Windsor Great Park on that momentous day, the monarchy found itself confronting fundamental questions about its role, its relevance, and its future. The guard who had said no to a prince had inadvertently opened a door to a new chapter in royal history, one where the weight of the crown would be balanced against the demands of justice in ways that previous generations of royals had never imagined possible. The palace was indeed in shock, but it was the shock of an institution finally coming to terms with the reality that even kings and queens must answer to something higher than their own authority. In a democracy, that something was the law, and Detective Sergeant James Mitchell had reminded everyone, including the royal family themselves, that no one was above it.